Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Alliance Bernstein. Since 2019, employees have impacted our community by giving more than 5,000 hours of volunteerism in Middle Tennessee. AllianceBernstein.com. Alliance Bernstein is not affiliated with National Public Radio.
This is Nashville. I'm executive producer Andrea Tudhope, sitting in for our host, Kalila Kalona. Comic books, graphic novels, newspaper cartoon strips, they're all beautiful ways to tell stories. Today, we're bringing you a rebroadcast of an episode we first aired last year around Free Comic Book Day. It's a nationwide event and the biggest day of the year for comic book sellers. Middle Tennessee shops definitely got in on the action. Last year, to kick off this episode, WPLN digital editor Rachel Iacovoni visited one spot just after the rush.
The sun's beginning to set on this Saturday night, and I'm just now pulling into a strip mall in Madison. Other shops in the plaza may have changed over the years, but this spot has been a staple for local comic book fans since the 80s.
Hello.
Hi there.
Danny Hayes works here. At this point in the day, he's got the spiel down.
On Free Comic Book Day, we offer 7 free comics off our middle tables here. They're the ones that are all labeled and covered, including little doodads and pickups.
Danny's not kidding. There are stacks upon stacks of comics on the tables. I've already spotted the X-Men, Archie, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Sonic the Hedgehog, and I'm pretty much still in the doorway.
We were busy all day up until about 20 minutes ago. So today, for the comic book industry, this is our Black Friday.
That's Larry Miller, the owner of Comic City 2.
Every time we do something like this, we always get new people that we start seeing every month or every couple of weeks. And a lot of people just haven't had a chance to get out since, the last couple of years. This annual event was rearranged or canceled due to the pandemic, so people are really excited to have it back.
It's really more than just an event. Larry says customers are happy to have community back. The store doesn't just carry comics, though there are a lot of them. It's a 60-40 split with board games for groups, RPGs, Magic the Gathering, Warhammer, you name it. Larry bought the shop in 2016 from the last owner after working for him for years. And with it, he carried on its tried and true model.
We really focus on our customer base and our community, and that's what keeps us in business. And that's one thing everybody's missed.
Talking with Larry, you can tell he knows a lot, but that wasn't always the case.
The bad experience I had as a kid, in the comic book store was, I want to read this. Where do I begin? They're like, just over there somewhere, blah, blah, blah. We don't want to repeat that.
That means fielding questions sometimes, like, hey, where can I find the Walking Dead comic the made-for-TV character first appears in? But Larry says he wouldn't change that.
Here you get exposed to everything, so you're much more likely to pick up and see something physically and have it catch your eye and compel you to read it than, I should read this because I read that. Whatever, As much as, the apps would like to be able to tell you and suggest to you what the next thing is, somebody like me or anybody in a store that has a little bit of knowledge thereof can lead you a lot better. And the artificial intelligence hasn't gotten that good yet. One day, maybe it will, but because we're a community, you can't do that online.
And you definitely can't go home without a Free Comic Book Day issue of Star Wars and Avengers and Legend of Korra and Steven Universe and Pokemon and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
That is a good haul right there. Steven Universe is my jam. One of the comics available for free was written and illustrated by my first guest. Well, just the first 20 pages, but it's definitely enough to draw you in. It won't always be like this. Author and illustrator Malika Gharib joins me now in studio. Malika, welcome to This Is Nashville.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So It Won't Always Be Like This is a part of Free Comic Book Day. What was it like for you to be there?
I think it was just wild to see that my comic, an indie comic in the world of comics, was placed next to superhero comics with really, really recognizable names. These are brand names. We're talking like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Captain Underpants, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and there was my comic. And what's amazing is that this comic is Free Comic Book Day is global. I had, I saw something that in Seoul, South Korea, Free Comic Book Day comics were there, including my book. And I just had so much fun scrolling through social media afterwards and seeing people include my book as part of their hauls, right alongside like X-Men. It was one of the few titles that were truly indie. So I was just over the moon.
Tell me a little bit more about your new book.
Yeah, so this book is about every summer I used to visit my dad in the Middle East. My dad lives in Egypt, growing up from age 9 to 25. And I used to, one year when I arrived, my dad told me that he had gotten remarried. And so the book is essentially about trying to fit in with a blended family, but it just so happens to take place in a Muslim Egyptian home, which I think that there's not that much literature about in general in the U.S. and a lot of misunderstanding about Egyptian, Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern cultures. And I think that this provides where I'm literally taking you inside the home of our family and sort of talking about what it was like to fit in for me, not in terms of my identity, but in terms of being just a part of this new family.
Why did you decide to focus on this particular part of your childhood?
Yeah, because so I previously wrote a book called I Was Their American Dream, which focused about my culture and identity and my relationship to being Filipino, Egyptian American, and the daughter of immigrants. And I really wanted to focus on this part of my life because I wanted to convey something very universal, which was what is it like to make relationships with people without culture, without knowledge of religion, without knowledge of social norms and expectations, without knowledge of language. It is possible, as I discover and learn in my book, to forge these very powerful relationships without anything at all. And so I think it conveys a probably very much needed message about people, immigrants nowadays trying to get along with each other.
You mentioned your first book, I Was Their American Dream. I want to get back to that really quickly. Can you tell me, how did you come to put that together?
Yeah, so I actually was inspired to draw these comics for my Instagram after in 2016, around the time of the Trump election, because I was hearing a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric in the media and in the zeitgeist. For example, immigrants don't belong here. Why are Muslims terrorists? Which was something that we had heard, what I had heard when I was growing up after 9/11. And, they're taking our jobs, bad hombres, you remember that rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was the first time in my life, in my adulthood, but I was like, wait a second, I thought we were cool, America. Guess not. So I started drawing these comics about my dad. This is the Muslim, Egyptian, Arab man who America fears. He loves Tom Hanks. He loves eating fried chicken, and he loves gardening. And I tried to push back on these narratives that we were seeing. And pretty soon I had 40 comics and then nearly 100. And then somebody reached out for a book deal.
Have you always been drawing since birth?
No, not really. I was always a doodler.
Okay.
And I really wanted to go to art school because I felt like I was more of a creative type, but my parents wouldn't let me, typical immigrant parents. And I actually came up in the zine community in my 20s, which was I was making these independent magazines, and I would include my doodles in them. Why? Because it was my zine, so I could do whatever I want with it. And my comics have so much naivete in drawing, and I don't like my style at all, but that's literally just what comes out of my hands when I draw. But it wasn't until the book when I started actually learning how to use a computer to draw formal comics and that type of thing.
How is writing for comics different than other forms of writing?
Yeah. So I find drawing and writing comics a little bit like poetry. So you have these elements, you have very few elements that you can work with. you have the dialogue, you have the narration, and you have the image. And all three of them must communicate something together, and that's part of the challenge. And for me personally, I love to add as few words and images and dialogue as possible. I want there to be space for your imagination to interpret what you're looking at on the page. So for example, here's an example of something fun about drawing comics. You can draw a couple kissing, for example, and that's a beautiful image. But then the narration says, I hate this man. And then the dialogue says, like, I love you so much. So, you know, each of those things isolated say totally different things. But when you see it all together, you have a totally different message. So I feel like when I'm drawing comics, I'm kind of like, you know, doing like a Rubik's Cube, like trying to figure out like the best combination of elements to get to like what I'm trying to say with few words as possible.
Now, going from making zines to a graphic memoir is quite a jump.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I was like freaking out when they told me that the book publisher told me that they wanted like a continuous storyline for 160 pages. And I was like, I do not know how to do that. I literally do not know how to do that. I also am not even a cartoonist, so I don't know how I'm gonna do that. And I just pretended like there was 9 chapters. I just like worked backwards. I was like, what is the longest zine I've ever made? 20 pages. Okay, I'm gonna cut the book into 20 pages each, and that was the chapters. And if you actually read them, they're all standalone. They're all standalone, like comics. Like I didn't know how to like craft like one continuous narrative, so I pretended like the book was 9 zines.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned before about working with a computer, learning how to draw on a computer. So first question I'm going to ask, your preference, drawing by hand or drawing with a computer?
Oh my gosh. I used to hate, I like drawing with a computer now because it makes so many shortcuts. You can enlarge things. You don't have to redraw. You can erase your mistakes, you know, Control Alt Delete and erase it. You can color things. You don't have to get messy. But that was a really steep learning curve for me in my first book because I didn't even know how to hold the pen. Drawing on a tablet is so different from drawing on a piece of paper and drawing with a pencil because you just don't know, like the feel of the tablet underneath your pen is like, it's just a different experience. I was also using the type of tablet where I had to look at a screen while drawing. So it was so complicated. I ended up getting carpal tunnel syndrome, so wow. I don't recommend it, but I do recommend it. So I don't know what to say.
Physical therapy.
Yeah, exactly. I did do physical therapy. Yeah.
I'm glad. So, but it's almost like you're a superhero yourself. You know, by day, you're a science desk editor, NPR, and on your off time, here you are creating these graphic memoirs. I want to know, have the two ever met somewhere?
Yeah. After my book came out, my editor, my manager at NPR was like, hey, you should do comics for us. And I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. And my first major comic I did for NPR was the pandemic had just happened. And the first comic I did was a guide for kids and coronavirus. And I did it in conjunction with the education desk with a reporter named Corey Turner. And I could not have imagined how impactful that comic would be. It was a comic and a zine. I made like a printable zine that people could do. And it basically had directions on how to protect kids and how to talk to kids about coronavirus. And it went completely viral, like millions and millions of page views. People were all around the world, like from India to Malaysia to, the Middle East to, I think like Poland, Korea. They all translated it into their native languages without NPR's permission. But NPR at that point was getting so many requests for translation that they were just like, just say yes to everything and just make sure they credit NPR.
Okay.
And I saw pictures of people like giving it out to school children and enlarging it and putting it up in like libraries. And for me, I was like, that is the power of comics. Like it transcends, it's so commercial in its ability to get to people in a way that maybe just a regular story without imagery would have done.
And we've seen that. I mean, you go to restrooms, you go to anywhere, we see the illustrations of telling us how to properly wash our hands.
Right.
How to properly socially distance. And so the imagery of illustrations is definitely something that kind of helped us through life. I want to ask you this. What do you say to somebody who's thinking about picking up a comic book? What do you say to somebody who's thinking about picking up a comic book? or a graphic novel, but they think it's for kids.
Yeah, that's a big issue. But I think that things are actually getting better for graphic novelists. That's such an interesting question. I still don't know how to answer that. I would say to that person that they should check out some other graphic novels like Persepolis and Mouse, and then come back to me and say whether they think it's for kids, because it can have some very adult themes, and its own format. It's its own, the storytelling style is so powerful, and it's not just for children.
That was cartoonist and NPR editor and illustrator Malika Gharib. Her graphic memoir, It Won't Always Be Like This, came out last fall. You're listening to a rebroadcast of This is Nashville from last May, all about the art of graphic storytelling, featuring some talented local comics. We'll be right back. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
This is Nashville. I'm executive producer Andrea Tudhope. Whether it's showcasing the adventures of larger-than-life superheroes or immersing us in historical events, comics have a way of helping us to visualize new worlds and perspectives. You don't have to look any further than the Marvel Cinematic Universe to see that comic books continue to have a huge influence on pop culture. But when we do look beyond the MCU, we see that comics and graphic novels draw readers of all ages and backgrounds and tell all kinds of stories, some of them even true. Today, we're bringing you a rebroadcast of an episode from last May all about comics, and our guests have worked in comics for years, and there's a good chance you've seen their work. Janet K. Lee is an illustrator and artist who has done work for Marvel and DC, in addition to her own art. And Anika Orak is an illustrator and cartoonist who is also the author of The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. I'll let our host, Kalila Kalona, take it from here.
Tell me, how did you get started working in comics?
Oh, it's a weird story. I was working as a buyer at Ingram Book Company in Nashville, and started doing some artwork on the side. A friend of mine who worked for Marvel wrote a book around 3 pieces of artwork I had done, and it went on to win an Eisner, and that sort of launched my career in comics.
That is a nice way to get in. So with all that, fast forward a little bit, you ended up doing covers for Marvel and DC. Question for you, have you gotten to do any interiors of the comics as well?
I have. They're non-superhero comics. I've done 2 Jane Austen adaptations for Marvel, and the work I did for DC was it was for Vertigo, and it was an anthology. The story didn't end up coming out, but they were great to work with at the time. So. But still not superheroes. I do everything but superheroes, apparently. I was wondering if the Jane Austen adaptation suddenly had them like firing photon lasers out of their eyes or anything, but no, nothing like that. No, unfortunately not. Just straight up Jane Austen.
Nika, how about you? How'd you get your start?
At a kitchen table when I was 3 years old, I think, probably, in regards to, professionally getting paid. Really, it just was I just was always drawing and always had some sort of peripherally creative job that wasn't really anything that filled my soul or maybe utilized the skills or anything that I had acquired. But it was really just through drawing that trying those peripherally creative jobs all the time, realizing, okay, I definitely don't want to do this. Okay, I definitely don't want to do this. And then just kind of going until something clicked, and that something was actually just really telling my own stories and digging for stories. And through that, discovering, it's kind of somewhat accidentally, stories of women, of other women that had just sort of been buried or fictionalized or, that, and it was just kind of like, I've always described it as like pulling a loose thread on a sweater, and then it just kind of keeps coming and coming, and you're like, oh my God, this is how did I not know about these stories? And wanting to share them and tell them and bring them to light, just using what I had, which is storytelling and drawing, and then seeing people respond to that and catching on, and then that leading to other opportunities and the book, and now future books and graphic novels that I'm really looking forward to. So it wasn't an Eisner Award, which is so cool. That's really cool, Janet. But yeah.
I want to get to this hidden histories a little bit later, but you kind of jokingly referred to it, like 3 years old at the kitchen table. I understand that this kind of thing runs in your family, right?
Yes. I come from a long line of cartooning.
Yes.
Yeah, my grandfather was a cartoonist, and that's how he started out, and he kind of did that on the side, and then he started writing on the side and eventually became a really well-known and beloved columnist, newspaper columnist in the San Francisco Bay Area. But my dad drew, everyone in my family is always kind of, like Malika was saying, doodlers. And my grandfather, I think, was the only one that really took it to like somewhat of a professional level. But I think I really learned a lot just from sitting at the kitchen table watching him and my dad draw. That was probably my earliest education.
That's beautiful. Janet, you are working on a new book that you're both illustrating and writing. What is it about?
This is my first time writing. Oh, it's about me, but it's not about me. It's not a memoir, but everything is true. It really happened to be. I've got a malformed hand. It's the hand that I draw with. So it's about a little girl who's very self-conscious about her malformed hand. And over the course of the book, she realizes that she's not weird. Weird is normal.
I love that. Now, both writing and illustrating a book sounds like a big undertaking. How are you handling that? I am lucky. I have a excellent editor who's kind of ushering me through it. It is a big jump, but I at least have had the advantage of looking at other people's scripts for years and years, so I know what it's supposed to look like, and I know how it's supposed to go, and now I just have to put the pieces together myself. Anika, do you relate to that? I mean, you wrote and illustrated a book about women's baseball.
Absolutely. And in fact, when the editor first approached me at Chronicle Books and said that they were interested in doing it, my initial pitch was just to share stories of the women who had played with an adjacent illustration. And she said, well, it's been a long time since they played. It's been 25 years since A League of Their Own, the movie, came out, which is pretty much everybody's sort of pop.
Hold on. 25 years ago, the movie came out.
It's been more than that now.
I saw that in the theater.
It's been 30 years now.
Wow, okay.
This was 5 years ago. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I know. Doesn't it just make your knees hurt thinking about it?
A little bit.
Yeah. And she said, well, it's everybody's, that's sort of everybody's touchstone, even though it's fictionalized. So we want the whole thing. We want the whole history, which really excited me. But my first question to her was, well, okay, great. Who's going to write it? And she just looked at me like, duh. And she said, well, you are. And I just kind of played it off. Oh, yeah, sure, naturally. Okay. And then I went home like, how but it like Janet was saying, my family is also, we have a lot of writers in our family. I had written just kind of personally and for, school, I guess you could say. So just like she said, putting the pieces together. And it was my apartment definitely looked like either someone was solving a crime or about to commit one. There's like pieces of paper pinned to every wall. I actually did use string to connect some lines of thought, but I just figured I got to do it however I can do it and thread together this narrative. And it's exhilarating to do that for the first time. And then once you get the flow, it kind of becomes addictive.
You got the book then, and you discovered where Jimmy Hoffa was buried.
Exactly.
Nice job.
Yeah, in my next book.
So I want to know about process. Like, aside from the length of a project, Janet, what's the biggest difference between creating a cartoon strip as compared to a comic book?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, a strip is really distilled. It's just sort of a moment that you're picking up. And the difference between illustrating someone else's work and your own is that you're sort of getting blank page syndrome a little bit. You know, you at least have a starting point for putting the jigsaw puzzle together when you're looking at someone else's words. But I mean, the process for me, I think I'm still figuring it out. I started out thinking I was going to do things one way. I tend to think of things really visually, so I thought I would be drawing little thumbnails as I wrote. But I kept to make so many changes that I had to revise all of that and go back to just writing full script. So panel by panel and describing what I want done and hoping I remember.
Anika, tell us about your process. Is blank page syndrome a real thing for you?
Oh, yeah. I hope it's a real thing for everyone. Otherwise, I'm doing it wrong. But there's kind of a lot of opportunity with that. It is, I think, one fun thing about writing and illustrating your own comic or book is that you get the opportunity to allow things to inform one another. So there's sometimes where, like, the words are flowing and the imagery was not, and vice versa. And when all of those things are coming from the same place and they're commingling in the same brain, I guess, so to speak, it gives you the opportunity to really tweak things on one end and tweak things on the other end. Kind of like Malika was talking about earlier, where you can convey a whole lot of message in one space. You can think, what do I want, like, the one takeaway to be? And that can sort of inform whatever direction you go visually or written. And so, yeah, it's definitely a real thing, and it's frustrating at times, but I've just found one foot in front of the other. You eventually kind of come back. Like, it'll always come to me in that half-wake, half-asleep spot where I'm focusing on one other page and trying to figure something out, and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, I got it. I got what I'm going to do, like 100 pages back. And, that's the phone call you can make to yourself in the middle of the night that you can't make to your editor or your illustrator. So.
Very true. Now, do either of you ever have emotional reactions when creating your work? Anika?
Oh, all the time. All the time. I was actually telling someone this recently that it's a little embarrassing to share this, but sometimes, I don't know how many other creatives feel like this, but it's been written about that sometimes you feel almost like you're just sort of this, like, just like a blob, like a physical conduit for some other, like, ideas that are floating in the air. And I think that's true to some degree. You are sort of the filter of your experience. But there's times when I'm putting something down and either the expression or the emotion or whatever is happening through the characters, they feel like they kind of have these little lives of their own, and they just came through my pencil, but I didn't actually create them. So I'll look, and I've definitely laughed out loud, or I've gone, oh, or I get a little tear, or I get a little misty, or I've actually gotten choked up sometimes at something I think is sweet. And then I catch myself and I'm like, this is so embarrassing. It's not like I think I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest at what I do, but it does feel like you're just sort of giving life to something that already existed sometimes. That's wonderful. Janet.
Yeah, she's completely correct. Annika's 100% correct. It's one of those situations, and I think there's an addendum when you're just, even when you're illustrating someone else's work as opposed to just doing your own. A lot of the pieces of the puzzle are finding out ways that you can, both visually and with words, really sort of fully convey the emotion that you're wanting to get out there. And part of the puzzle of writing the comic, at least for me, has been to figure out the pacing so that you're using page turns, using the way the pictures flow across the page to help draw people to the moment you want them to be at when they have the same realization as the characters, or they get to the same place as the characters.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking with local artists and illustrators Janet K. Lee and Anika Orok about their work and what inspires them. We have a tweet from Emily Kimmelum, who says, my favorite graphic novel is Tide Song, and D and Doggos by Scout Underhill, coming soon. Hashtag not just for kids. Check it out, y'all. Scout is joining us later on in the show, but I wanted to pick up on a piece of that, the hashtag. We talked about this before the break. Who are comic books and graphic novels for? Janet.
Comic books I like to say that comics are a medium, not a genre. Actually, I think my friend Amy, too, came up with it. She wrote a couple of the books I did. But that's because it's just a way of telling the story. It's not a genre in and of itself. So you have everything from one of my favorites, which was, believe it or not, the 9/11 Commission report that was done in graphic novel form. It made it so much more understandable than trying to read that dense prose. And you can find anything you want to in comics. Comics are for everybody.
Anika, I understand that the history of women in cartooning has been kind of a driving force for you. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. In cartooning, in animation, what came to be in baseball, it was actually through doing that, discovering some of these stories. I had heroes growing up, and admittedly, most of them were men because those were the heroes that were portrayed. I grew up loving animation. So between Warner Brothers and Disney, the famed creators at Disney are literally called the 9 Old Men. And we're only recently are these stories being sort of excavated, written about. But what's exciting to me is that a lot of these stories, like Janet is saying, they're very academic. A lot of them are very dry. I'm very grateful to the people who are doing this research, of course, but I think that's where we get to come in with comics and creating visual interpretations of these stories is accessibility and making it for everyone. And I do just feel it's exciting. I find my own heroes in these stories. It's and I think they deserve that. They deserve to have these stories brought out to people. And also, what I'm finding is that a lot of these stories that have been buried for so long, that I'm just finding like 90% of these stories are white women. And it's like if we're only hearing about these stories now, like 20, 30, 50, 150 years later, what stories have we not yet found? And sadly, what stories may we never know? So that is a driving force for me.
Some folks don't recognize that if they head out to Free Comic Book Day, they'll see folks from all aspects of our society. Today, more and more people can find a comic that they can see themselves in and connect to that story. That kind of comes down to representation, which you were just talking about with Anika. Do you think it's important to be able to see yourselves in comics? Janet?
Absolutely, 100%. I can't tell you, I just spent the weekend at Portsmouth Comic-Con in the UK, and I can't tell you how many kids I was talking to who came up and described seeing themselves for the first time in a particular comic, their background, their particular experiences. It can be a really powerful moment for them. Adults too, I'm sure. But I was mostly hearing from kids, so I know it's really effective for them. But, if you see yourself, you see it, you can dream it,
Yeah, I hear that. Anika?
Absolutely. Oh, I mean, and, I think it's so beautiful that we can open these doors and pass these things on to younger generations and to kids. But I will say it's like never, ever too late. I was in my 30s when I started discovering stories of women who had played professional baseball. And then that, like I said, sort of that unraveling and finding really incredibly influential, necessary women in like Disney animation in the 30s and 40s, women in cartooning that, made a huge difference in how like Jackie Orms changed, just with her comic strip and cartoons, actually influenced the way that Black women were portrayed in media in general, just through what she did with that. So discovering, I discovered a lot of these women in my 30s and that empowered me and made me feel like I was seeing a part of myself through that. And actually, I think I don't know how many years it's been, but there's a really great conversation on YouTube between, and I'm forgetting his name, gentleman who was on The Daily Show, talking about Franklin, the introduction of Franklin to Peanuts cartoons. And there's a really great conversation with that really touches on what you're saying. That's just really cool.
Illustrator and cartoonists Anika O'Rourke and Janet K. Lee, thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
This has been great.
Thanks for tuning in for this rebroadcast of our episode from last May, all about the art of graphic storytelling. When we come back, we'll take a look at some DIY aspects of comics and illustration. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Andrea Tudhope, and this is Nashville. For this rebroadcast episode, we've spent most of the hour so far hearing about more traditional publishing in the world of comics and graphic novels. But DIY has always been big for comics. I'm talking zines and webcomics. Our guests are a few local artists who take that approach. Daniel Pujol is co-creator and editor of Salt Weekly Zine, a spoof alt weekly, and Scout Underhill is creator of the webcomic D and Doggos. Our host, Kalele Colonna, takes it from here.
So, Scout, tell me about your webcomic D and Doggos. That sounds like fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it started kind of as an accident, actually, in 2017. My dogs did something just that I thought was pretty silly. I decided this sounded like a tabletop role-playing game scenario, like a D&D thing. So I made a little comic about it, shared it with a couple friends, and my friend Guy Copsonbutt, who was doing daily webcomics, suggested that I post it online, post it to Reddit, and it grew from there. And now we're coming into the 5th anniversary of my webcomic just because I decided to make a silly little story about my dogs.
Now, do your dogs have strong personalities?
Oh, yes, definitely. The first comic that I did, Magnus, ended up being the dungeon master because he's more of like the leader of the pack and kind of keeps the other ones in line a little bit.
Okay.
Pickles tends to be very playful, very loud. Tonka just wanted to have a ton of fun. And then there was Zoe, who is like the mother dog. So they all just really work together like a D&D party.
That sounds awesome. Daniel, you have a postcard comic called Thaw, but hold on, let's rewind a little bit. What is a postcard comic?
Well, it is a bit of a comic book that just so happens to be on a postcard. And there's a little subgenre of DIY art. It's called mail art. And me and the collaborator that I do it with, Frank Hand, during quarantine, we were FaceTiming all the time on another project. And then eventually the conversations that we were having just accumulated and accumulated and accumulated. And we just built up this whole creative world together. And then my printer is a woman named Erica Baldwin, and she helped me figure out how to create a USPS regulation postcard format, and then me and Frank just went to town on it.
How much fun do you have making that?
The maximum amount of fun that is allowed in terms of USPS regulation.
Yes. We have to stay within the regulation when having fun. It's very important.
We must.
You also co-founded the zine Salt Weekly, which is a play on words. What's the concept there?
Well, the concept is that Salt Weekly is a spoof alt weekly that is only published bi-monthly.
I like that. I like that a lot. Now, how did you guys come up with ideas for the content?
Well, so in 2018 summertime, me and John Sewell, who does a gallery here in Nashville called Pack and Plant Gallery, and then Alex Lockwood, who does a gallery called Elephant Gallery, we were up in the attic in Pack and Plant before it was all the way finished, and we were just having a free conversation about different kinds of writing and different kinds of artwork that there wasn't really a venue for in publication, and we just decided to create a magazine / zine that is Salt Weekly, and it runs a bit of everything from poetry to polemic to comics to photography, and we just roll with it. It's a snowball, and we chase it down the hill.
Now, do you all come up with the content yourselves, or you find collaborators?
It is a total mixed bag. So usually the way that it works is because, me and John have, there was a lot of quarantining going on, as we all know. It's basically we riff through a text thread or in person. We come up with a series of motifs, and each issue has a motif. We announce the motif, and we call open submissions. So the open submissions are going to be riffs from all different kinds of people and all different kinds of mediums on that motif. And then we grab all those submissions, we cram them onto the page, and then we make the magazine's physical format reinforce the motif.
Okay, how can I be a part of this? How can I find out what the motif is, just in case I want to riff about something?
Well,
I'm asking for a friend.
I'm very interested in the possibility of such riffage. You could go to Instagram, which is @thesaltweekly, or you could email us at thesaltweekly@gmail.com. And, we're talking about DIY and all that kind of stuff, and we've done some panels and stuff. Really, anyone that's listening out there, we invite you with open arms and a positive attitude, with respect and kindness, peace and love, to submit to Salt Weekly.
Sounds wonderful. Now, Scout, what makes a web comic different from other comic mediums?
There's a lot of different kinds of web comics out there right now. Webtoon is one of the most popular formats, but mine is a little bit more old school. So I just post once a week on Fridays. A lot of webcomic formats tend to be in a couple panels, maybe only like 4 panels that end, on a joke, and they're more episodic. Mine is a series, so it's been ongoing for 5 years now. But still, you want to be able to have, at least for me, something that kind of ends each of the comics every week on a fun note, a high note, something silly. And that's a lot different than I think a lot of other formats that you might get in a book.
Now, I can imagine that with a webcomic, you're connected to your audience in a real-time fashion. So what's it like to be that close to your audience?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. I do not have the largest fan base, but I have the best fan base. They are fantastic. They support me on Patreon. It's only because of them that I am able to keep doing this. I didn't know when I first started if it was going to be something that I'd get to make a living out of. But my fans have really come through for me. They support me. Sometimes we hang out on Zooms like once or twice a year, or have little holiday gatherings. I'm really connected with them. It's become its own community of people who have made different connections, have even met up with each other because of my comic at conventions and stuff like that.
That sounds really cool. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking with artists Scout Underhill and Daniel Pujol about alternative ways to make comics. Now, we got a question in from Stuart C. O'Black on Twitter, and he asks, do your artists do their own typography too? Words are artistic as well. Scout?
I do for the webcomic. I also do the hand lettering for any sound effects and things like that. D & Doggos is coming out as a graphic novel in 2024, and I will be doing the hand lettering for the sound effects. However, my publishing team is hiring an in-house letterer to do the words and the speech bubbles for me.
Daniel, what about you?
On Thaw, Frank does all of the lettering, and I do the layout for all the postcards. So we have this really cool kind of index of numbers and letters and punctuation and stuff like that. And then he does all the mailing too. So if you order the postcard, he does the address and everything. So we have well illustrated, consistent lettering, and it's beautiful.
Now, Scout, you mentioned the book. Dee and Doggos have a book forthcoming. Tell me more about it. How did it happen?
Oh my gosh. It happened through a Twitter pitch event, actually, because I had made a pitch for Dee and Doggos as a graphic novel. My editor found my webcomic during the pandemic, so she became a huge and fast fan. She actually requested that I submit it even before I had an agent, and it went from there like really fast, and I'm absolutely thrilled. So I'm in the middle of working on book 1 while simultaneously getting started on book 2 for a 2024 release and a 2025 release.
Wow.
Yes, it's pretty quick, but I'm extremely excited because the format for a graphic novel gives me a lot of room to play with different panel layouts and page turns that I don't get to do with my webcomic.
Now, Daniel, you have a pretty deep knowledge of Nashville's zine history. How long has the zine scene been active here in town?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I can be pretty didactic about it because John Sewell, Mary Mancini, and Alan Sullivan, going all the way back to about 80s punk rock stuff here in Nashville, have helped me check the veracity of a little short list. So it seems like about the earliest is a dateless one by Dave Willey called Dixine, but the one that starts off being trackable is called Nashville Intelligence Report by Andy Anderson, which ran from 1982 to 1985, followed up by Anthem by Keith Gordon in 1983, Peacock Parade in 1983, Blast by David Willey in 1984, Weasel Weekly by Lee Carr in 1985, Fireplace Whiskey Journal by Tom Wood, 1988, House of Pain by Donnie and April Kendall in 1990 to 1992, Tag by David Willey in 2002, We Close by Kevin Riley in 2014, and Salt Weekly by John Sewell, Daniel Pujol, and Alex Lockwood, 2018 to the present.
I love some of the titles. Fireplace Whiskey Journal. I have to read that. I definitely have to read that one.
Yeah, John is collecting archives of a bunch of that stuff, which you go over to that Pack and Plant gallery. You can talk to him about that. He is doing an excellent job archiving all this stuff.
Sounds like it's been a pretty tight community. And I understand, Scout, that there's a tight community of illustrators in Nashville.
Yes, there is. Actually, that's how I've really started on this illustrator journey. There's a group of illustrators here for the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. So I joined that in 2016, and we've had monthly meetings that have really helped me grow as an illustrator, to just have that support group of friends who know the industry, can really help you, uplift you, and share advice and everything. And through the pandemic, we've continued to meet via Zoom every month, and it's been really fantastic.
You know, I want to ask this question. Like, when you all create your work, and particularly in today's environment of audience interaction and influence, do you try to adapt your work to what the audience wants and to where the audience is acting in effect as your editors? Daniel, how do you approach that?
I do not believe in any way, shape, or form that the audience is my editor. And I don't mean that in a I'm going to do whatever I want kind of thing, but because I'm going to be doing that anyway. But, you know, you got to make stuff finished for people so they can understand it. And I don't feel any pressure really with anything I make to do this kind of where's my burger sandwich artist Yelp style stuff with anything I ever do. Period.
Scout, do you feel the same way? I mean, like you said, you've had a lot of supporters on Patreon, and people can stop supporting on Patreon if they decide they don't like the work you're coming with. What's your approach?
They're not my editors. However, because I'm doing this weekly, sometimes I'll have a buffer of comics ready to go. But there are times where the audience has a better idea than what I planned, and I might just steal that idea a little bit.
That works. You can give them credit. It works. I got one last question for you, Scout. Answer this for me, please. You know, what about the person who has an interesting idea, but they have no clue on how to get started? What's your advice to them?
My advice for you is to just do it. Just get started. If you look at Diondago's with the art style that I have now versus comic number 1, it has just evolved. If you're at all interested in creating anything, if you want to make comics, just start making comics. Don't think that you have to be prepared to do it. If you want to do it, you're already prepared.
That is Scout Underhill, the creator of the webcomic Diondago's. They were joined by Daniel Pujol, co-creator of Salt Weekly. Thank to you both for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in for this rebroadcast. We're back live tomorrow with an episode all about Tennessee's new third grade retention law. Under these new rules, up to 60% of our state's third graders could be held back. To put it lightly, parents are not pleased. Tune in. This is Nashville is a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Steve Harush, Rose Gilbert, and Magnolia McKay. Our digital lead is Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Kalila Colonna is our host. Michaela Elias is our technical director. And I'm your executive producer, Andrea Tudhope. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. Special thanks to Rachel Iacovoni, John Sewell, and Mary Mancini. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville, find us on Instagram, and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody.